the clinical study of voice uses the same tools that have already been mentioned in other places in discussing phonation. Laryngoscopy uses cameras that are designed to look at the larynx. There's a rigid camera that's basically a camera on a stick that you can put in the oral cavity to look down at the larynx. Or there's a flexible camera, a fiber optic camera that you can thread through the nose to hang down the back of the throat to look at the larynx. You can do acoustic analysis of the voice, focusing primarily on fundamental frequency and how it reflects vibration of the vocal folds. Stroboscopy combines together looking at the larynx with a laryngoscope with a camera, along with acoustic analysis to create a slow motion version of vocal fold vibration by combining different pieces of the glottal cycle across different vibrations of the vocal fold. And then, as mentioned before, the electroglottograph runs an electric current across the glottis that can be used to monitor whether the vocal folds are open or closed with high precision. I am by no means a voice expert, but one thing I have noticed is that how a voice sounds isn't necessarily related to the severity of somebody's voice problem. You can have a voice that sounds pretty normal, and then when you look at it with a laryngoscope, there's a large tumor or something like that on the vocal folds. Similarly, somebody can have a very bad voice quality and be very hard to hear, but they don't complain of any pain, and you can look at the vocal folds and they can look completely normal. So their problem might have something to do with muscles or with their neurology. In discussing how the use of phonation is working, or maybe more specifically where it's not working, since phonation involves an interaction between airflow, air pressure, and muscular activity, different parts of initiating phonation or suspending phonation can be a problem for people. So when describing the voice, we can talk about the vocal attack, the movement of the vocal folds into the airstream to get phonation started. Sometimes this can be a problem for people. We can talk about sustained phonation, so keeping the vocal folds in the airstream with the right amount of tension to continue phonation happening, or the termination of phonation, abducting the vocal folds to end phonation, depending on what kind of issue somebody has. If they have a dysphonia, for example, that involves muscle spasms, they may have difficulty initiating a vocal attack or terminating phonation because of spasms in the abductor muscle, for example, or they may have trouble maintaining phonation because muscle spasms make it difficult to keep the vocal folds in a properly adducted position. Studying the voice clinically using some of our acoustic measures, we do have norms for fundamental frequency for men and women of different ages. What the average range of fundamental frequency is for a sustained vowel or for a recorded sample of speech that we have from somebody. So you can have someone sustain a vowel or have them read a speech passage and look at their fundamental frequency versus what's typical to see if they're well outside of the normal range. In looking at somebody's use of their voice, their habitual pitch would be the fundamental frequency that the person typically uses in speech tasks, something around their average fundamental frequency. This may not actually be their optimal pitch given their physiology. Optimal pitch is the fundamental frequency that someone should use based on the physiological characteristics and a modal voice quality. You can sometimes get an idea of somebody's optimal pitch by having them do phonation, but in a more non-speech-like way. Like in saying something like mm-hmm, or having them hum. You can also look at the range of pitch for a voice from lowest to highest. This could be in a speech sample, like in these lectures that I'm recording, or you could have a person try to create their highest pitch and their lowest pitch to see what kind of range they have. Again, we have norms for these things that are typical for males and females, sometimes at different ages. And you can compare a person's performance to what the norms are. If a person's habitual pitch is different from their optimal pitch or their pitch range is reduced, there is probably a cause to that. Could be due to excess muscular tension, could be due to some problem with the vocal fold or the larynx, could be due to neurological damage affecting the muscles that control the vocal folds. There are some fancier acoustic measures of the voice that can also be useful, especially in potentially detecting voice problems at an earlier stage. So looking at the detailed vibration of the vocal folds from cycle to cycle, there's a measure called jitter, which looks at how much variation there is in frequency from one cycle to the next. Normally, if you have people hold a steady pitch vowel, there will not be a lot of variation. If there is a lot of variation, that may point to a problem. Similarly, there's a measure called shimmer, which looks at the variation in intensity from cycle to cycle. So again, if you have a person just phonate a vowel, they'll be able to maintain a fairly constant amplitude unless they have some sort of problem controlling their voice. So increases in jitter and shimmer beyond the normal range for men and women occur when there are anomalies in the vocal folds or other problems involving phonation, like muscular spasms or neurological problems.